Empaths don't wake up one day and decide to have fewer friends. It happens slowly, almost invisibly, as a natural consequence of how they perceive the world and the people in it. From an early age, empaths notice things others miss: tone changes, microexpressions, forced laughter, passive aggression, insecurity hidden behind jokes. All of it registers instantly. Where most people interact on the surface level, empaths are constantly reading what's underneath. This heightened awareness becomes both a gift and a filter. Over time, it makes shallow, fake, or low integrity behavior impossible to ignore. Most social circles are built on convenience, shared environments, habits, and unspoken agreements to not look too deeply. People bond over distractions, complaining, gossip, validation, or mutual avoidance of their inner issues. Empaths don't fit comfortably in these dynamics. When someone is pretending, exaggerating, or wearing a mask to gain approval, the empath feels it immediately, often in their body before they can explain it logically. There's an internal friction that shows up as discomfort, fatigue, or a quiet urge to pull away. They may not confront it directly because empaths aren't looking for conflict. Instead, they simply stop investing energy where it doesn't feel clean or real. This is where many people misunderstand empaths. From the outside, it can look like they're antisocial, aloof, or even judgmental. But the truth is much simpler. Empaths value authenticity more than belonging. They would rather sit alone with their own thoughts than participate in conversations that feel hollow or performative. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. When you're deeply attuned to emotional truth, pretending becomes exhausting. Small talk that leads nowhere, friendships built on using each other for emotional dumping, or relationships maintained out of fear of being alone all feel heavy to an empath. Low integrity behavior is especially repelling to them. This includes dishonesty, manipulation, playing victim, covert competition, or saying one thing while meaning another. Many people tolerate these behaviors because they want access to a group, status, favors, or emotional comfort. Empaths sense the cost of that tolerance immediately. They feel the energetic tax long before the logical consequences show up. Over time, they learn that every fake interaction drains them, while genuine solitude restores them. Once that realization clicks, their social circle naturally shrinks. In Corey Wayne terms, this is self respect developing at a deeper level. Empaths don't consciously say, I'm cutting people off. Instead, they stop chasing approval, stop over explaining themselves, and stop lowering their standards just to keep people around. When you no longer laugh at jokes you don't find funny, agree with opinions you don't respect, or entertain drama you've outgrown, many people quietly disappear. Not because the empath pushed them away, but because there was nothing fake left to hook into. Another layer of this is that empaths often expose people without trying. Simply by being present, listening deeply, and asking sincere questions, they make others feel seen, and that's uncomfortable for anyone hiding from themselves. A superficial person wants light interactions with no depth. An empath brings depth by default. This makes people feel naked, judged, or insecure, even when the empath hasn't said a word. Instead of rising to that level of honesty, many people retreat. They label the empath as too intense or hard to connect with, when in reality they just don't want to be seen that clearly. As empaths mature, they also stop rescuing people. Earlier in life, many empaths attract users, emotionally needy friends, chronic complainers, or people who want free therapy without accountability. Over time, the empath realizes that constant emotional labor without mutual respect is not love, it's self abandonment. Once they stop playing that role, those relationships dissolve quickly. The empath didn't change, the dynamic did. When you stop feeding dysfunction, dysfunction looks elsewhere for supply. This is why empaths often go through phases of having very few friends or none at all. It's not because they lack social skills or warmth, it's because they've outgrown low quality connections faster than they've found high quality ones. And high quality people are rare. People with integrity, self awareness, emotional regulation, and accountability aren't everywhere. When an empath refuses to settle, solitude becomes the natural in between space. Importantly, this solitude isn't empty, it's clean. There's no background noise of drama, no obligation to perform, no pressure to maintain appearances. In this quiet, empaths reconnect with themselves. Their intuition sharpens, their boundaries strengthen, their sense of identity stabilizes. They stop confusing intensity with intimacy, and availability with value. This inner clarity makes it even harder to tolerate superficial bonds in the future. From the outside, society often treats having many friends as proof of success or likability. Empaths see through that illusion. They understand that quantity often hides a lack of depth. 10 shallow connections don't equal one honest one. Because they feel things deeply, empaths require fewer connections to feel fulfilled. But those connections must be real. Anything less feels like emotional junk food. Eventually, this filtering process becomes automatic. Empaths don't try to fit in anymore. They speak honestly, move slowly, and observe before they trust. Superficial people sense this immediately. There's nothing to manipulate, impress, or extract. As a result, those people fade away, sometimes suddenly, sometimes quietly. What remains is a small, intentional circle, or a period of being alone while waiting for aligned people to appear. And here's the key truth most people miss. Empaths aren't lonely because they have fewer friends. They're lonely only when they betray themselves to keep the wrong ones. Once that pattern ends, solitude becomes peaceful, even empowering. They learn that being alone is far better than being surrounded by people who don't respect truth, depth, or integrity. Empaths don't love lightly. When they care fully. Their attention is not casual, their presence is not half hearted, and their emotional investment isn't something they switch on and off depending on mood. When an empath lets someone into their life, it usually means they've already sensed potential depth, honesty, or shared values. They don't open up to everyone, but when they do, they give more than most people realize. Not just time, but emotional space, understanding, patience, and loyalty. In the beginning of many relationships, this depth can feel magnetic. People feel heard around an empath in a way they may have never experienced before. Conversations flow, vulnerabilities surface. The mentor listens without interrupting, without judging, without trying to fix everything immediately. For someone who's been emotionally starved or misunderstood most of their life, this feels like oxygen. But here's the problem. Many people enjoy receiving depth far more than they're capable of giving it back. At first, the imbalance is subtle. The empath notices they're always the one checking in, remembering important details, offering support during tough moments, and making space for emotions. Meanwhile, the other person enjoys the attention but rarely reciprocates at the same level. They might respond late, deflect serious conversations, or disappear when the empath needs support. Early on, the empath often excuses this behavior. They're understanding by nature. They tell themselves the other person is busy, stressed, or just not good at expressing feelings. But empaths feel patterns, not excuses. Over time, their body registers what their mind tries to rationalize. There's a growing sense of emotional fatigue, a subtle tightness when the phone lights up, a hesitation before reaching out again. This isn't resentment, it's awareness forming. The empath starts to realize that the connection feels draining rather than nourishing. They're pouring into a cup that never seems to pour back. Unlike people who seek validation, empaths don't beg for attention when this happens. They don't send long emotional messages demanding appreciation. They don't create drama or issue ultimatums. This is where the Corey Wayne principle shows up naturally. When effort isn't matched, the empath doesn't chase, they pull back quietly, gracefully, without making a scene. This withdrawal often confuses people. The person who is used to constant emotional access suddenly feels distance. They may interpret it as coldness or assume the empath changed. In reality, the empath simply stopped overgiving. They stopped leading the connection single handedly. They stopped investing where there was no mutual exchange. This isn't punishment, it's self respect finally turning on. What's important to understand is that empaths don't expect perfection. They don't need constant reassurance or dramatic displays of loyalty. What they look for is effort, presence, and emotional honesty. A simple check in, remembering something they shared, being there when it matters. When those basics are missing consistently, the empath feels it as a lack of safety, and when safety disappears, attachment slowly dissolves. Many empaths learn this lesson the hard way. Earlier in life, they often stayed too long in one sided friendships or relationships because they believed their giving could inspire reciprocity. They thought if they loved harder, listened deeper, or stayed more patient, the other person would eventually rise to the level of the connection. But maturity teaches them a painful truth. People don't grow because you love them more. They grow when they choose to take responsibility for themselves. Once this realization settles in, the empath's behavior changes permanently. They still give deeply, but only after effort is shown. They still care, but they no longer overextend. They observe first. They let others reveal who they are through consistency, not words. This naturally reduces the number of people who stay close because many were never interested in mutuality, only access. This is also why empaths are often mistaken for being distant or hard to read. When you're no longer chasing connection, you don't over explain yourself. You don't announce your boundaries. You simply stop showing up where you're not valued. And people who benefited from your emotional labor feel that loss more strongly than you do. For them, the connection was a resource. For you, it was an investment. Another layer to this dynamic is that empaths can sense when people are emotionally unavailable, even if they're physically present. Someone might talk every day, joke, and hang out, but never truly show up when things get real. Empaths feel that absence sharply. They don't confuse proximity with intimacy. If emotional availability isn't there, the bond slowly weakens no matter how often contact happens. Over time, empaths become incredibly selective with their energy. They understand that attention is currency. Where you place it grows, and when you consistently place it in people who don't reciprocate, you train yourself to accept imbalance. The empath eventually decides that being alone is healthier than being emotionally used. This decision doesn't come from bitterness, it comes from clarity. Interestingly, when empaths pull back, some people suddenly increase effort. They text more, ask what's wrong, or try to re engage emotionally. But by then, something fundamental has shifted. The empath has already seen the truth. Effort only appeared when access was threatened. That realization changes how safe the connection feels. Empaths don't want to be chased only when they're leaving. They want consistency when they're present. This is why empaths often end up with fewer friends over time. It's not because they stop caring, it's because they stop carrying relationships alone. They refuse to be the emotional engine for connections that wouldn't survive without their constant input. And when you stop doing that work, many relationships quietly collapse. Solitude becomes a byproduct of integrity. When you no longer overgive, your calendar opens up. Your phone becomes quieter. And at first, that silence can feel strange. But soon, it feels peaceful. There's no pressure to maintain emotional balance for others, no guilt for needing space, no resentment building under forced interactions. In this space, empaths reconnect with themselves. They notice how much energy they use to spend managing other people's emotions. They realize how often they ignored their own needs to keep connections alive. This awareness makes it impossible to go back. Once you know what mutual effort feels like, even if only briefly, you can't unsee the absence of it elsewhere. Eventually, empaths attract fewer people, but better ones. People who don't need to be reminded to show up. People who give without keeping score. People who understand that emotional connection is a two-way street. These relationships take longer to form, but they don't drain. They don't require constant maintenance or emotional negotiation. Until those people appear, the empath remains comfortable standing alone, not closed off, not bitter, just selective. They know their depth is valuable. They know their presence is meaningful, and they refuse to offer it to anyone who treats it as optional. This is why empaths pull back instead of begging. They don't fight for attention. They don't compete for space in someone's life. They observe, they feel, and when effort isn't matched, they step away, quietly, with dignity. Because at their core, empaths understand something most people take years to learn. Real connection doesn't require convincing, it requires mutual willingness. Empaths don't suddenly lose friends, they slowly grow beyond them. This process is rarely dramatic and almost never intentional. It unfolds quietly as the empath's internal world expands faster than their external environment. While others remain comfortable repeating the same emotional patterns, conversations, and lifestyles, the empath keeps evolving. Their awareness deepens, their standards shift, their tolerance for unconscious behavior drops. And without trying to leave anyone behind, they find themselves standing somewhere new, often alone. Growth for an empath is not about status or achievement, it's about alignment. They're constantly reflecting, questioning themselves, examining motives, healing old wounds, and refining their understanding of human nature. This inner work changes how they relate to people. Things that once felt normal start to feel off. Jokes that rely on cruelty or insecurity lose their appeal. Complaints without accountability become exhausting. Relationships based on shared pain rather than shared purpose begin to feel heavy. The empath doesn't judge these people, they simply no longer resonate with them. Most friendships are formed at a specific emotional level. People bond where they meet. When one person grows and the other stays the same, tension appears. The empath notices it first. Conversations feel repetitive, advice goes unheard. The same problems show up again and again, with no desire for change. At some point, the empath realizes they're no longer connecting, they're observing. And observation without participation slowly creates distance. This is one of the most painful aspects of being an empath, outgrowing people you still care about. There's grief in realizing that love alone isn't enough to sustain connection. You can understand someone deeply and still not be able to walk alongside them anymore. Empaths feel this loss intensely, but they don't force continuity. They don't pretend to be smaller to stay close. They accept that growth creates separation before it creates alignment. In Corey Wang terms, this is the natural outcome of self respect and purpose development. When you're focused on becoming your best self, you stop orbiting other people's dysfunction. You stop bonding over complaining, blaming, or avoiding responsibility. That shift automatically removes you from many social dynamics. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer compatible. Empaths often experience long gaps between meaningful connections because they outgrow people faster than they replace them. They move through emotional levels quickly, while the world around them moves slowly. This creates seasons of solitude that can feel confusing if misunderstood. Society tells us that constant social engagement equals happiness. Empaths discover the opposite. Forced connection is draining, while intentional solitude is stabilizing. During these periods alone, empaths don't stagnate, they integrate. They reflect on past relationships, identify patterns, and refine boundaries. They learn the difference between empathy and over identification. They stop taking responsibility for other people's emotions. They strengthen their sense of self. This internal consolidation is necessary before new, aligned connections can form. What makes this especially challenging is that many people don't like it when an empath grows. Growth changes dynamics. The empath no longer agrees automatically, no longer validates unhealthy behavior, no longer plays emotional roles they've outgrown. This can trigger insecurity in others. Instead of rising to meet the empath's growth, some people attempt to pull them back through guilt, criticism, or subtle pressure to be like before. But the empath can't go back. Once awareness expands, it doesn't contract. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unfeel what you feel. So the empath chooses honesty over familiarity. They choose inner peace over social approval. This choice often looks like isolation from the outside, but internally it feels like relief. Another reason empaths outgrow people quickly is that they learn lessons fast. Pain accelerates their growth. Every heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment pushes them inward to reflect and adjust. Many others repeat the same cycles for years without self inquiry. This creates an emotional age gap. The empath may be physically the same age as their peers, but emotionally they're operating on a different timeline. This gap becomes obvious in how conflicts are handled. Empaths move toward resolution, accountability, and understanding. Others may avoid, deflect, or blame. Over time, the empath stops engaging in conversations that go nowhere. They stop explaining themselves to people who don't listen. Silence replaces argument. Distance replaces frustration. As this happens, the empath's social circle shrinks, sometimes drastically. Birthdays go quieter. Messages slow down. Invitations stop coming. At first, this can trigger self doubt. The empath may wonder if they're becoming too serious, too selective, too withdrawn. But eventually, clarity emerges. Nothing was lost that was truly aligned. This phase is not permanent, but it is necessary. Before you meet people at your new level, you must release those who only knew you at your old one. Empaths who rush to fill the gap often end up repeating old patterns. Those who allow the gap to exist use it to recalibrate their values and identity. Solitude becomes a classroom. The empath learns how they want to live, love, and connect going forward. They refine what they will and won't tolerate. They build a life that feels good even without constant social input. This is crucial because it ensures that future connections are chosen, not needed. Eventually, new people appear, not many, but the right ones. These connections feel different from the beginning. There's ease, mutual respect, shared growth, no pressure to perform or rescue. Conversations feel nourishing rather than draining. These relationships don't require the empath to slow their growth or dim their awareness. They encourage it. Looking back, the empath understands why the lonely seasons were necessary. Without them, they would have settled, they would have compromised, they would have stayed attached to versions of themselves they had already outgrown. Growth demanded space, and space demanded letting go. This is why empaths often appear to have few or no friends for long stretches of their lives. They are not socially failing, they are socially refining. They are shedding connections that no longer match their frequency while preparing for ones that do. And although this path can feel isolating at times, it leads to something far more valuable than popularity, alignment, integrity, and peace. For empaths, solitude is not a punishment or a failure, it becomes a sanctuary. What most people fear, being alone with their own thoughts, is exactly where empaths regain their strength. After years of absorbing emotions, managing unspoken tensions, and carrying the emotional weight of others, being alone feels like finally setting something heavy down. The quiet isn't empty, it's restorative. It's where the empath stops leaking energy and starts coming back to themselves. In the beginning, solitude can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Empaths are naturally relational. They care, connect, and attune. When social contact reduces, there's often a brief phase of questioning. Is something wrong with me? This doubt usually comes from social conditioning, not inner truth. Society teaches that popularity equals value and constant interaction equals happiness. Empaths discover, through experience, that constant interaction without depth equals exhaustion. When an empath spends time alone, their nervous system finally settles. There's no emotional noise to filter, no moods to manage, no expectations to meet. This allows their intuition, often drowned out in busy environments, to become clearer. Thoughts slow down, feelings untangle. The empath begins to distinguish between what they genuinely feel and what they previously absorbed from others. This clarity is powerful. It restores a sense of inner authority. Solitude also teaches empaths self sourcing. Instead of looking outward for validation, stimulation, or reassurance, they learn to generate these internally. They read, reflect, train, create, and think deeply. Their sense of identity becomes anchored in who they are, not in how others respond to them. This is a major shift. Many people never develop this internal foundation, which is why they fear being alone. Empaths, once they cross this threshold, stop fearing it altogether. In Corey Wayne terms, this is emotional self sufficiency. When you don't need others to regulate your emotional state, you stop chasing connection. You stop over investing. You stop tolerating disrespect just to avoid loneliness. Solitude becomes the space where your standards crystallize. You learn exactly how peaceful life can be without unnecessary drama, and that peace becomes non negotiable. As time alone continues, the empath's boundaries strengthen naturally. They don't have to rehearse saying no, they feel it instantly when something is off. They don't need to explain themselves endlessly. Silence becomes a valid response. Solitude teaches discernment. When you've experienced calm consistently, chaos becomes obvious the moment it enters your life. Another transformation happens here. Creativity and purpose rise to the surface. Without constant social distraction, empaths reconnect with what genuinely excites them. Ideas they ignored come back. Goals that were postponed gain clarity. Many empaths discover or deepen their purpose during periods of isolation. What once felt like loneliness becomes incubation. Interestingly, this self contained energy can be intimidating to others. People who rely on constant social feedback may feel unsettled around someone who is comfortable alone. The empath's calm presence, lack of neediness, and emotional steadiness signal strength. This is why solitude doesn't isolate empaths in the long run, it refines their signal. They become less visible to everyone, but far more visible to the right people. When empaths finally do engage socially from this grounded place, the dynamic changes completely. They're no longer trying to be liked. They're no longer overgiving to secure connection. They're observing, choosing, and responding rather than chasing. Relationships formed from this state are fewer, but vastly more stable. There's no emotional roller coaster, no guessing games, no unspoken resentment. Solitude also rewires the empath's relationship with time. They stop filling every moment. They become comfortable with stillness. This patience translates into their interactions. They don't rush intimacy. They let people reveal themselves. This alone filters out many unhealthy dynamics before they even begin. Another overlooked benefit of solitude is emotional resilience. When you've sat with yourself through boredom, sadness, uncertainty, and silence, external situations lose their power over you. Rejection doesn't devastate you, disappointment doesn't derail you. You've already built a home inside yourself. Empaths who master solitude are remarkably unshakable. This doesn't mean they stop desiring connection. They still value love, friendship, and intimacy, but they approach these from abundance rather than lack. They want connection, they don't need it. This distinction changes everything. Neediness repels, grounded presence attracts. Solitude teaches empaths how to embody that presence effortlessly. Over time, this inner stability becomes magnetic. People who are emotionally mature, self aware, and growth oriented recognize it instantly. They feel safe around someone who isn't trying to take, fix, or impress. These are the relationships that last, not because they're intense, but because they're steady. Looking back, the empath often realizes that solitude was the bridge between who they were and who they became. Without it, they would have remained overextended, underboundaried, and externally oriented. With it, they learn how to protect their energy without closing their heart. This is why solitude becomes an empath's strength rather than their weakness. It sharpens intuition, it stabilizes identity, it raises standards, and most importantly, it ensures that any connection that enters their life must add value, not drain it. In a world addicted to noise, distraction, and validation, the empath who can stand alone is rare, and that rarity is precisely what makes them powerful.